Hello and welcome to the Chthonia Monday live stream. I'm Breach Burke, and we are at the 25th of November. That's what today is. And so we've got next week is December. We're pretty much out of this month, or we're going to be out of this month at the end of the week. So enjoy the rest of November while you have it. Hello, Alex. You and I were just chatting. So we're definitely coming to the end of the month here. The end of 2024. I mean, we only got, I think, next Monday's the 2nd, 9th, 16th, maybe 4 more live streams. And good afternoon. Yes, that's actually correct. I'm still saying good morning, like we're on the morning one. Monday's funny because I do 2 live streams. I do one on my other channel, transition.life.coaching, and then I do this one here. So today is, it's been a very busy morning for me. I've been doing, catching up with getting things posted. It's Black Friday week, and so jumping on the capitalist bandwagon, I'm like, okay, this is the week to have my sales for people who want to get stuff. And of course, that leads us to Chthonia books, which was what we were having a conversation about. And I think it's worth saying, for whoever watches this recording, that the good question was raised of I've got Chthonia books are now for sale. My fiction only is for sale. I don't have any copies of Ellen's book right now, unfortunately. Typically, the way that it works when I sell Chthonia books is I go through the distributor. Now, if you're in the USA, I can get a link directly to the distributor, okay, and they can print a book and ship it to you. The timetable on that is not determined because it's just a matter of when they produce it and when they send it. The thing is, I usually usually give people the Amazon link. Now, a lot of people are hating on Jeff Bezos right now, so a lot of people don't want to go through Amazon. And truthfully, when it comes to making money on books, and again, my goal here is not to be like, I need to suck in as much money as I can. Like that's not, nobody gets rich writing. I mean, unless you're J.K. Rowling, I guess, or somebody like that, or Stephen King, very few people get rich on writing these days. So my stuff is, so what I did was I ordered a certain number of copies, only a few, like I mentioned last week, just a handful of each title. And I posted a link to that this morning, and it's in my bio if you go to chthonia.net/publications and scroll down so you can, I put them under the image for each title with the synopsis so that people can know what they're buying. I did put the synopsis also in the square description of the book, of the plot of the book, so that people know what they're getting if they decide to order. But the question that Alex raised was, what if you want to buy more than one? So I was like, I'm not really set up for that, am I? Because Chthonia Publications, it's more like ordering one at a time. So I would just say to DM me if you want to order multiple things. Like if you want to get more than one title, you should be able to get more than one copy of a title. That way, if somebody for some reason wanted to buy multiples. But depending on the stock that's available. But if people say, I actually want to buy 2 or 3 of your books, then that can be worked out. And often I can do cheaper shipping because it won't cost as much. So so I have your package sitting here ready to go, Alex, which I will do after the live stream today because so we're already starting to get things sold. So again, if this is something you've been wanting to do, people have been wanting to read my books and just kind of like, I'm going on Amazon, I don't feel like buying it right now, or maybe it's just been a lot. It is at a much cheaper price, but believe it or not, even at $5 a book plus $5 shipping, even at $5 a book, I'm making more. Yes, the multiples for one title seems to work. Thanks. Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, exactly, because you're just adding quantity. But when you have to do different ones, I think I would have to have an interface for Square, which is what I use for processing inventory and credit cards and stuff. I used to have an e-commerce set up with my Chthonia site, but that got to be so obscenely complicated and required so many plugins, and I don't know why it has to be this way, because it should just be a forward, PayPal checkout or something like that. No, not straightforward at all. So I just decided, and it was costing me a ton of money. So I'm like, I'm just going to ditch that, and I'm just going to, I have a Square subscription. So that's just what I use. It's the one thing. But that is the one thing. I'd have to create another website just to do that. And I'm like, I've already got 4 websites. So I really don't want a 5th one. So yeah, so I'm kind of doing it, and I figure people who want to buy multiple copies, you can just DM me directly, and we'll sort it out. Venmo, PayPal, something like that. So, okay, so yeah, so books are on sale. So that's big news number one. And, okay, and as far as podcasts, okay, so the remasters, I've gotten some questions, because I've gotten some requests for things that are currently in the remastering pile. So I have done so far, Jesse Pollock helped me with the Lilith one, and I've also done Hecate Part 1, but I meant to do quite a few more, but it just seems like everything's been incredibly busy, and it's been one thing after another. We are in Mercury retrograde, so maybe this is a good time to go back and revisit that stuff and get it fixed up and get it online. But I do need to have a little bit of space to be able to work on that stuff, because it's not just a matter of... Because that's what I used to do in the past, actually. When I first did this podcast, I would record 6 months in advance, and I would just slap the intro and outro on, and then that was it. I just put it up. Which is why they sound so bad in some cases, or at least why they have like the swallowing and the other. And some of the swallowing on it was really loud. I was like, why is this so loud? Like, I know it can end up on my current podcasts, but it's not that loud. It's like, tiny little, you can probably hear it when I do it now, Kara's little, but you don't really hear it. I mean, but it's minor. I hear it, so I edit it out. But at the time, I wasn't really, I was just like, okay, I'm just putting a podcast out here, and good afternoon. So the earlier ones were not edited very well. So anyway, it does take me some time. If a podcast is an hour, then it probably takes me 2 hours at least to edit, to go through and listen to all of that and stop and clean up things. And sometimes if I feel like I've repeated myself 5 times in a row, then I want to delete that too. Saying it once is good enough. So, so we are working through all of that. So I'm hoping to get at least some more remasters. I don't want to promise they're all going to be done by the end of the year, but we will try to make some more progress and get up at least the main ones that people have been asking for. So, now the list of new episodes. Right now I am up to 14 episodes that have been through requests. Obviously Patreon requests are my top priority. And then I've gotten some YouTubers who have requested, they said, hey, can you cover this or cover that? In fact, the podcast I did this week was a YouTube request, but it was was I in England at the time that happened? I'm trying to think. So maybe I was thinking it was 3 years ago, but it was actually 2 years ago that I had, it was 2 years ago that I had gotten this request, because that was when I did Chthonia. That was when the other Aztec goddess that I did, Goddess of the Underworld. And of course, this week's Chthonia podcast was on, how do you say the name? Tzloteo. That's how you say it. I had it in my mind. It was like repeating it to myself a million times. Tzloteo was the subject of this week's podcast, which was a request. And we've only got 2 more episodes for 2024. I think I'm doing the Loreg, and I'm also doing La Befana. Those are the last 2 that I'll be doing for 2024. La Befana, of course, for the winter season, because she is associated with that. And I'm realizing I did Frau Perkta and Grilla and a lot of these other wintry kind of goddesses, but I think those were some of the ones I took down to redo. So, So anyway, I'm never without work over here. I've always got stuff going on either here or on the Transition Life Coaching side of the house, where I do more of my individual courses and so forth. Now, the Institute for the Study of Feminine Myth, we have finished our semester, and right now people are doing projects. A couple people are still, I think I've got 2 out of my students, I've got 1 more project that I have to negotiate with somebody, and we've got an appointment to do that this week. So, and it's a small group this time, and we did have some people from Patreon join. We did have some people who paid to audit and come in and just listen to individual lectures, which is always going to be an option. I have emailed faculty to see who is coming back for the spring term, 2025. Right now, Dr. Max Orsini is going to come back. He covered images of feminine transformation in poetry. Next term, he's going to cover images of masculine transformation in poetry. Because next term, the theme is going to be about balancing the masculine and feminine. How do you integrate the masculine and feminine? How do we bring them together? And my theme the lecture that I have in mind for next term is going to be, excuse me, the theme that I'm going to have is going to be about Irish ideas of sovereignty and the idea of the female conferring sovereignty. So I'll be talking about the Morrigan, I'll be talking about Queen Maeve, and I'll be talking about some of the legends like the Dearg Dua, some of the legends that have to do with the way in which women are portrayed as granting sovereignty, how that seems to have been interpreted kind of in the medieval church in terms of that practice, and then also in terms of what happens when a female in that environment is denied sovereignty, and what kind of consequences that yields. So that's what I want to talk about in the spring. And right now I'm finding out from Joanna and Kate if they still want to come back, and I may be bringing on some different lecturers as well. People have asked me if they can come in. So we'll see where that leaves us in terms of a schedule for next term, whether it's going to be 8 weeks, whether it'll be a little longer. But that's all being sorted out. I've been getting a lot of questions about, what's going to happen next term, how much is going to cost next term, and all this kind of stuff. So we're wrapping up. And certainly the people in the ISFM and on my Patreon and, students who have been in various classes that I've taught online are going to be invited to my Zoom party. I have it was a suggestion that we all kind of get together and have a winter kind of soiree. So we're going to everybody can kind of meet up in one space. So I'm going to be arranging that as well. Okay, so those are all of the updates that I have on what I am doing as far as Chthonia and its my kind of sister sites of Institute for Feminine Myth and also the Transition Life Coaching, which is as I've said, that's my individual piece that I decided to separate out from Chthonia, because a lot of times people on Chthonia are only interested in the academics. They may be interested in the mythology and just the discussion of the dark feminine, and may not be interested in that other piece. So and sometimes there's a crossover. So in any case, so that's everything that's new for right now. Okay, so what I was going to talk about today, and we'll see whether or not this takes me till 1 o'clock or not. But usually the week that I put the podcast out, I usually like to elaborate a little bit on the podcast theme and the topic. And Chthonia is a Aztec goddess who has to do with filth. Okay, has to do with dirt, with filth, excrement, anything that you, any byproducts, as I think I was calling them a lot in the podcast, that you expel from your body, is certainly connected to Chthonia, and she's also a goddess of purification. Okay, so she is an example of where the cure is in the disease. And we do see this theme that is exhibited in certain places. And I think the idea of the disease being the cure is an interesting thing to think about, not only when we think about balancing masculine and feminine, but also other dualities that we have between good and evil in particularly when we talk about the notion of exorcising evil. When we say that we need to get rid of what is demonic, or what is considered to be something that will destroy us in some fashion, something that is destructive. So the way I started to think about this was, okay, if we think about the idea of exorcism, okay, give me a second here. If we think about the idea of exorcism, so what does one exorcise? They exorcise demons, right? I mean, we talk about exorcism, that's when somebody is, possessed by something that is considered to be malignant, that is considered to be, harmful to the soul. When you hear about demonic manifestation, how do they talk about demonic manifestation? Well, usually there's a foul odor, right? There's like an odor of like sulfur. Or of excrement, or of something. There's something that's generally, and there's like a heat to it as well. Like sometimes a room will become very, very hot, allegedly in these kind of encounters. And so we definitely have this idea of this, of the demonic as being associated with what smells bad. If you actually read the descriptions of a lot of demons in the Goetia, Some of them are associated with these, with foul odors and with, flatulence and stuff like, you see a lot of this. They're generally considered to be filthy creatures, because if you conceive of hell as being something that's under the earth, then you would conceive of, like a lot of things that we think of as, if you think of the body the way Plato did, like the body as a tomb, if we think about, or we think about the corpse and the way that the corpse rots and so forth. When we think about rot and decay, it doesn't give off a pleasant odor. And that rot and decay in a system that suggests that death is something to be conquered, okay, as we would see in Christianity, particularly St. Paul talking about Christ conquering death and the harrowing of hell and things like that. The idea that, first of all, you have this very, very hot place called hell, which, underneath the earth, certainly what's theorized is that we have, the understanding is that when we see with volcanoes, that we have a layer of magma, and underneath that layer of magma, the crust of the earth goes down a certain amount, then you have the magma, and then you get down to the core, which is presumed to be of iron. Now, I don't know how geologists have determined that or what tests they've done, but that was always the way it was taught when I had learned geology in school. Now, whether that has been updated, don't know. But certainly we have the idea from vents in the earth and from, again, from volcanoes and things, that we do know that there seems to be kind of this fiery activity that goes on beneath. Now, does that mean that there's a physical hell there? Well, no. But this is where you can see where some of these associations and ideas might come from. And so you have this idea of impurity when we talk about the demonic. We talk about something that is foul, that's how if a medium walks into a house and or somebody walks in, or a priest or somebody, and they smell a foul odor that seems to be connected with some other events that seem to be that suggests something like that. That's one of the things that they would use as an identifier, right? Okay, so where do we go with that? Well, if evil is associated with what is putrid and foul smelling, right? That's an evil. We can also compare that to what we think of in the body. Okay, so when we are, when we're sick and not feeling well, frequently stuff comes out of our body that we would consider putrid and not very nice, right? Whether it's, if your stomach, we can just imagine what comes out either end, is putrid. If you have a cold, all the stuff that comes out, you're blowing your nose and all that kind of stuff. It can be, these are things that are generally considered to be very germy, and things that contain a lot of bacteria and a lot of infection. They're byproducts that are considered to be toxic. Okay, they're not considered to be, we don't look at them, in a favorable light. And then that kind of, so when we have diseases, and disease, by the way, is also attended by heat, as we were talking about with the demonic thing, because if you have a fever, okay, the body, the body often feels very, very cold. And you have to break the fever. One may break into like an excessive kind of a sweat, as they're trying to sweat out whatever the disease is, right? You're trying to clear that out of your system. So when we talk about a soul that's healthy and a body that's healthy, we're looking at some very similar kinds of associations and ideas. Okay? The idea that the sick body, that the sick soul is somehow going to be similar to the sick body in some way. All right. So then if we're going to talk about sickness, now there was certainly ideas about religion. I think it was Nietzsche who had the idea that ancient religion, that religion may have been a thing that came about to combat disease, okay? Or to at least create some way of negotiating disease. Because if you think of a lot of the forces that affect us as having to do with the forces around us, if that's your conception of deity, of gods, and of daemonic figures. Demonic does come from the word daemonic, but daemonic means something else. Certainly in ancient Greece, when you're talking about a daemon, you could be talking about an intermediary spirit, what we now would think of like as an angel or a spirit guide, one that connects you with the divine, right? That's what an intermediary is. That's a daemon. Socrates talks about his daemon that gives him his wisdom. Later on, it turned into demon, because basically anything that was an intermediary that was not an angel was somehow suspect or evil or whatever. So you have these daemonic beings, but you will also see in Greek mythology that daemonic beings, that certain psychological conditions are considered daemonic. So, for example, mania is a daemonic being. These beings that have to do with frenzy or with anger or with like anything that kind of puts you outside of what we would think of. That kind of puts you into a space that's not what we normally identify with the normal social conventions. Probably a lot of mental illness now would have been attributed to one of these daemonic beings, right, in ancient times. And the idea that it's a daemonic being that's affecting you kind of plays into this idea that connects body and soul, and that says that this affliction of the soul, that these are daemonic figures that can bring disease of the mind, just as there's things that can bring disease of the body. Certainly in ancient Babylon we see that. Like a lot of the demonic figures, there were things that could bring disease. And you still hear about that, really. You still have this idea that disease is... that was certainly the idea that the priest came in to basically exorcise you of the spirit that was causing your illness. Right? There's not a separation, in other words, between mind and body. But the affliction of the soul is same as the affliction of the body. And the forces that would cause that are as spiritual as they are material. Now, we just tend to think of everything in terms of, disease in terms of germs or bacterial infections or viruses, or and we treat things with antibiotics. Viruses, you really can't. They just kind of got to work themselves through. I mean, you can take things for antivirals and things, but they are generally, because of the nature of the way viruses replicate and the way they behave in the body, they're not. It's not always easy to have a reliable antidote to those kinds of things. Sometimes you just have to live through them and work through them. You have to kind of live with whatever it is. And of course, we have, I was going to get into the idea of vaccines, but I'll talk about that in a moment, because that's slightly different in terms of what I'm getting at here. Okay, so we think of disease as being some kind of an invader, a foreign invader, right? It's something that's possessing us biologically. And again, it's not like it's, like we're being cursed. I don't know, maybe people believe to be cursed by it, but, it's something, we know that it's something like you go out and you touch the same door handle as somebody who has a cold and they didn't, I don't know, they didn't wash their hands and you can get a cold. Things like that. Things just happen because they're out there in the environment. They can affect us. There's all kinds of factors that bring disease in. And certainly disease was something that was very much brought to our attention during COVID, where people were sort of extra careful about hygiene. People masked up so that they didn't breathe on each other. Excessive hand washing, what they called, basically the stuff that we used, why am I not thinking of the word right now? Oh, well, anyway, you know what I'm talking about. Like, sanitizing wipes, hand wipes, sanitizing gel, all of that kind of stuff. In addition to everybody, buying toilet paper in mass and paper towels and shit. It's all this kind of, this idea, all these things that are going to purify and that are going to create a condition of hygiene. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about pollution, right? Now, there are deities of pollution besides Chthonia, and you also have, for example, Matangi in the Hindu. Matangi is a goddess of pollution, and she is one of the Mahavidyas. She is one of the 10 forms of Shakti that conveys a human wisdom. Okay, and Matangi is her offerings are usually like leftovers. Now, normally when you make an offering, a puja offering to a god, you don't make an offering of, it's a fresh offering. You don't pull the leftovers out of your fridge and put it in front of the altar. That's just a big no-no. You don't do that, except for Matangi. Matangi is the one who will eat the leftovers. She will the one that will take the things that are considered to be excess. Okay, and that's an interesting thing too. Things that we think about excess and our attitudes towards excess, right? excess versus austerity, right? We tend to see austerity as almost a spiritual value, where when you do something excessively or indulge in something excessively, that is considered to be a negative. Like when one needs to be, thoughtful and circumspect, and needs to be, show restraint, right? Show restraint in how we do things. And which I'm not saying that's bad advice. A lot of times it is because if you overindulge, you will feel sick. Actually, excess can make you feel ill. So we have all of these ideas around pollution, and the idea of it as being a negative, and certainly we have these two female deities in particular that we can name. I can kind of name off the top of my head, and there are probably other ones too. Now, Pambagira does not serve that role. That is not her function. She's very seductive kind of a goddess. She has a lot to do. Women who are looking to make, men lust after them or something, might appeal to Pambagira. But she is sometimes called like the Mary of garbage, So now we see almost this association of sexuality with what is polluted. Okay. And if we think about feminine sexuality, okay, the monthly period that women get, that's, in many cultures, that's a pollution, right? That's something, the woman is unclean, right? And she has to be outside the community until it's over or whatever, You see these ideas of cleanliness and uncleanliness, and because, it bleeds, and it's not the most pleasant aroma that comes from that. I'm so glad I've been over not having any of that for the last 3 years. But it's something that women, it's a normal part of womanhood. You just get your monthly period, but it's something that's unclean. It's something polluted, right? That's the way it's often seen. And there's other types of uncleanliness too. I mean, like I said, when we're sick, when we do even when we're not sick, when normal defecation and urination, not a pleasant thing. Doesn't have a pleasant aroma. Something, and we have special disposals to get rid of that kind of stuff because it's considered to be toxic. Now, it's interesting. I think I mentioned this in the podcast. At this time of year, I live near several farms. And the farm that is kind of just, I have a cemetery. It's interesting. I have a cemetery, and then I have a farm, like a cornfield past that, right? Well, it's not mine, but, it's within sight of my house. Okay. And so you have one type of pollution in the cemetery, right? Because the corpse, think about how they prepare a corpse for burial, right? Formaldehyde. There's all of these things. Well, formaldehyde is actually probably very toxic for it, but the way in which we think about the decomposing body and how that can also bring sickness, right? You always think about the ways in that. I think that's something more evident when you look at someplace like New Orleans, for instance, where you have these above ground kind of graves that they would put the bodies in. And then with the frequent flooding there, if these graves would suddenly the corpses would like come out of the ground and kind of wash around. This is how you get yellow fever and things like that. There's an uncleanliness of the body. But I was going to say, with the farms out there at this time of year, I would go out in the evening to get something, in my yard or whatever, and the smell out there was just pungent because they were spreading manure over the fields where they had cut all of the crops down. They put cow manure and things out there. And there's been often a discussion of that when my sister and I walk, and we walk on a path where there's Clydesdales, and the horses will, do their business on the path, and it doesn't always get picked up, or at least doesn't get picked up right away by the farm. So you're walking past these huge piles of horse shit, basically. But it's interesting to see how they kind of decompose into hay. It's like they almost go back to the thing that they were, that they ingested. It kind of decays back into that. And oftentimes this is also considered to be something that's very good for the soil. It's very good it has nutrients in it. So again, it's not regarded as a pollution. However, a lot of times cat and dog waste and human waste particularly are considered to be toxic. So it's very interesting, the biology of that, right? So if I go back again, so we're talking about all these things that are unpleasant pollutants, things like that, not things we want to have in our environment because they bring disease, right? They can bring sickness. Now, if we step back and look at things on a more spiritual scale, especially in the type of spirituality that we have in the West, this very patriarchal type of spirituality that is connected to the monotheisms. Like I said, there is, even though these are not dualistic religions, all of them, well, at least there's a suggestion that Judaism has been influenced by Zoroastrianism. I would argue that that's a much later association. A lot of people try to point out to Cyrus the Great in the Book of Ezra and things like that. And as I've said in my book, I don't see a whole lot of evidence that Cyrus, calling him Cyren. Now, confusing him with Saint Cyprian, right? Cyrus was anything other than a worshiper of Marduk, like a lot of the other rulers of that region. I don't see that he was, and of course, Ctesias said he worshipped Zeus, and I'm like, well, that's they have, everybody has their own translation, but I did not get the impression that Cyrus was actually a Zoroastrian. His successor was, but I don't think he was. Nonetheless. Given when all these regions and people started to interact with each other, especially as empires would grow in that area of the world, ideas spread. And Zoroastrianism is one of the first religions we talk about in the West that has the idea of a cosmic good versus a cosmic evil. Okay, so that is a kind of dualism. Now, what's said when you learn about monotheism, they will say, well, monotheism is not dualism. We don't believe in a cosmic battle of good and evil, because God is all good, all knowing, all benevolent, all benevolent is good, right? All powerful, and it's like, okay, but there is a dualism there, because you have this book of Revelation. You have this notion that's placed there, probably like by St. Paul mainly. But you still have this idea of the Essenes, certainly, who were considered, Jesus was sometimes theorized to be part of this Essene group, certainly have a lot of their writings are apocryphal in the idea that there's this battle between good and evil, and that you have to stay on the side of the good, right? So when you have this idea of this battle between good and evil, now in Christianity, the way that manifests is you have a God and you have the devil, right? And the devil is not considered to be dualism, because they say, well, the devil's not equal to God. Devil is way lesser than God, but the devil's able to influence humans, so that's where the battle comes in. Okay, this is what is said. If you read Jung's answer to Job, he will say, well, actually, the devil's probably just the shadow of God. The parts of God that we repress and want to pretend aren't there. But let's just stick with the good-evil thing. So, all right, so when you have this idea of good versus evil, right? When you have this idea of angels versus demons, you have a celestial realm versus a Chtonic realm, right? And this is what I talk about in my book. And I think this really, what we talked about in this week's podcast, really gets to the theme that I've said when my thesis is that when one has a celestial religion, when your religion is focused on the gods of the sky, this devalues the earth, everything under it, and it devalues the feminine. The feminine becomes equated with hell. And this is actually the perfect illustration of that. Because think about everything that I just said at the beginning of this about the demonic, right? What we think of when somebody is possessed by a demon, or how a demon is possessing, whatever the theology is around it, right? But that the demonic is this stuff of foul odor. It has to do with excrement. It has to do with disgusting things, blood and blood offerings are Chtonic, right? There's this notion here, the idea of the satanic blood pact, right? Everything's about all of these things, these bodily fluids and so forth, and it's talking about them in a more toxic kind of a way. And so when you have something that creates a dichotomy between good and evil and says sky is good, earth is evil, and again, like when we think of the Earth Mother, that's a little harder to conceptualize, and technically, Tlazoteo is actually an Earth Mother, okay? But, and this may be where we're able to kind of bridge this gap a little bit. When we're talking about an underworld that has filth and that has all things that are unholy are also unclean, okay? That there's an impurity there's a lack of cleanliness. And so when when it's unclean, so therefore, when we talk about filth, when we talk about stuff, dirt and filth and excrement and things like that, we are talking about something that belongs therefore to the realm of the demonic. That's what the association is. You never hear about, like, I don't know, Archangel Gabriel appearing and smelling of excrement. Like, you don't, that's not how it works. They're not that type of a being, right? So we have these celestial beings that come from a space that is said to be very cleanly and pure. And again, this goes back to Plato and his idea that the body is like some kind of tomb. I think Clive Barker actually did a story about this, about somebody who, when they left their body, it's like when they re-entered their body, it was like they were being like the sucking and like the encasing in flesh. Like, he really kind of plays up the idea that the body is just like this foul-smelling, awful kind of cage for the spirit that wants to be free, right? Or that wants to be, and that's kind of what Plato's conception is. That's why he places the underworld in the sky, right? The realm of Hecate is the realm of the moon, and then the sun kind of becomes the solar realm of the solar deities, of the 12, right? Who represent, you could say there's 12 Olympians because there's 12 solar months, right? So this is what we kind of have this idea of this celestial underworld. It's when Persephone gets put into the sky, and Jake Stratton-Kent, of course, was going to talk about the effects that has on our psyches when you take what's meant to be under here and put it in the sky. Now, okay, so yeah, and pollution, it becomes a problem of the earth. We have to deal with actual pollution, not just human, normal human byproducts of what we eat, drink, and whatever. We're also talking about the kind of pollution that we create in terms of the stuff we make, right? We talk about the floating islands of plastic in the ocean and stuff like that. There's the other garbage that we make. And sometimes, and how one disposes of or gets rid of that garbage. There's a lot about how much material can be composted or can decompose. Okay, because if something cannot decompose, then it kind of remains, and it can become a hazard to other living creatures. Like, for example, if you're talking about plastic in the ocean, you're about dolphins getting tangled up in it, and or different animals that are choked or suffocated or strangled by floating garbage and things like that, just as one example. So garbage and kind of disposal of garbage is a big thing, right? And we talk a lot about recycling and about how we can take things and repurpose or reuse them, right? Okay, so to talk about the goddess that we talked about this week, Tlazolteo. When we talk about the idea of holy shit, literally, or filth as being something that is divine, okay, I think more people might be familiar with that from tantric territory, like I was talking about with Matangi, who is considered to be kind of a tantric Saraswati. She is, this is about the remains of things. This is about what's the cleanup, the waste. That's why, like I said, you have deities where you offer, like Matangi is a deity, you offer leftover food. So it's the idea that the excess, that the garbage, the excess, has a place to go. And not only does it have a place to go, but these are goddesses, by offering things that we would consider to be the ultimate in profane, right? I mean, the word profanity, what? Think about that. I think I talk about this too in the podcast. What's our profanity? When you're cursing at somebody, what are you doing? You're calling them names that are either associated with sex or they're associated with, excrement, or the parts of the body that do that, okay? That do any of those things. And then you have sex kind of lumped in with this as well. Because the reality of sex is that it is, we have all these very romanticized, visions of sex. Sex is actually a pretty dirty thing. You really think about it. It's not always a, it's not like you're all sleeping on a bed of roses and with these beautiful scents. That's why I think maybe there's a lot of scents that are put around because the natural scents are not always that great. The female body does actually make changes. Like at the time at certain times in a woman's cycle, she gives off an almost musky kind of an odor, which is a little bit more attractive, right? And in the times when, I don't know, presumably this is when the body is not ready to procreate, it may be a decidedly less pleasant aroma, which is why you have all these feminine like hygiene washes and sprays and things to kind of, because trust me, regular soap does not always work. You do need something to kind of neutralize and deactivate whatever's acidic or whatever. Sex itself can be a very in spite of how it's romanticized, how the procreative act is romanticized, frequently it's not something that's, and in spite of pornography, right? How you have all these kind of weird things. Most people, I don't think it's like that. It's, it can be something that can be, engaged in kind of these dirtier things. And childbirth is a very dirty thing too. Like I said, giving birth is, there's all kinds of stuff that comes out when a woman gives birth. And so it's definitely, nothing about it is considered to be what we would think of as sanitized or pure in any kind of a way. And hence we have that mythology that says of Adam and Eve that when they're banished from the garden, that a woman will now have trouble in labor. So in other words, her uncleanliness comes out of her disobedience, right? That's the biblical model. But here we have a different kind of a model. And when we see this in the Tantrics, and then we also see this among the Aztecs, who apparently they said the whole conception of Tlazolteo came from a Mexican goddess who really the attributes were not really discussed of this, or even who this other Mexican goddess was. Or maybe it was just known that maybe there was such a figure, maybe there was an image or something, but maybe there's not a name attached, so it all tends to be associated with Tlazolteo. She's pictured with this kind of curlicue under her nose, and it's actually their image for excrement. And I'm like, well, that seems pleasant, but that's literally what she does. She devours that kind of, she devours shit. That's what she does. And so, but this makes her a goddess. So, but okay, on the flip side of this, she is also the goddess of purification. Steam baths, interestingly, right? We were just talking about heat earlier, right? She's the goddess of the steam bath. The idea that the steam is what purifies you. Just like, if you're sick and you have a fever, when you break and you sweat, that's the purification process. That's what allows you to release, whatever is in your body, or it's a sign that your immune system is working and releasing it. So what would happen, and really this is the example. Aztec society had its rules, okay, and these rules were they had a lot to do with the way, particularly the royal society had to behave, what was taboo. And you see these kind of taboos in societies. The reasons there are taboos against excess is because if everybody engaged in certain things all the time, you wouldn't really have a society. You would just have chaos. If you're trying to build something that's structured together, there has to be rules. And this is why there are limits that are set. Taboos are really limits that are set on how far one can go with certain kinds of behavior. And of course also because when we have behavior that's too chaotic, it can become destructive. It's like if you think about, I don't know, for some reason I'm thinking of atoms and molecules that as soon as they gain some mass, depending on their thing, they might immediately disintegrate. You wouldn't be able to sustain anything. We talk about sustainability, right? To sustain and preserve something in a particular form requires a certain amount of ordering. It requires a certain amount of limitations. So, no, you can talk about the bacchanalian, going out and getting excessively drunk, or having a lot of sex, or just maybe living in an environment that we don't consider to be very clean. After a while, this can have a destructive effect on a community. So there has to be limits on those things. And so when we think about a goddess who is just completely dedicated to the idea of filth, right, of the idea of something that is disgusting, things we don't even like to talk about, things that you're not actually allowed to say, to people, that you could be censored on TV, or you could have your video, like, I don't know, pushed to the background by YouTube because, you're saying all those filthy, dirty things, right? It's not, it's interesting in the way in which we associate that kind of filth with what is evil. And so if we follow that analogy, okay, or that connection, then it's interesting to think about the idea that the disease is also the cure. Okay, with Chthonia, she had priests that heard confessions. Okay, now that's something we see in Catholicism, right? Maybe that's one of the reasons that Catholicism can connect in with some of elements of these ancient religions, is because there's some similar practices. But the idea is that, and the thing is now, this particular cure you can only do one time in your life. So somebody who has been very debauched, okay, who is engaged in all kinds of things, maybe they've even ended up with STDs. And by the way, Chthonia is also the goddess of STDs. Interestingly, she's also not connecting these two things at all. But she's also a goddess of epilepsy. Okay, so that's interesting, because that's also kind of considered to be kind of like this divine intervention of the mind in some way, or the way that the brain is affected. She's also connected with that as well. I didn't delve as deeply into that connection in the podcast, but that is another thing. It's very interesting that she has to do with these kinds of things, but she's also the one that takes it away. When you think about the madness of Dionysus, taken away by goddess Cybele, for example. In Cybele, there's a lot in the mythology of Cybele that I would not call this a one-to-one match by any stretch, but Cybele also seems to be connected to these things that are kind of ideas of the earth that are kind of outside what we consider the social acceptable or in taboo areas. Okay, there's a lot of these taboos are associated. This is kind of the taboo aspect of the feminine in a certain way, but the idea that it's divine, that filth is divine, and that and again we can. The obvious thing of that is when we said the way in which one composts, or the way in which we use manure and things like that to replenish the earth so that new things can be born, and those new things are required for life. They're required. You can't. We are not designed to live by not eating and not consuming, and not having, water or some kind of hydration or something. We're beings that are designed to live and to function and sustain life that way. So a lot of these things that are used to both to sustain life, to create it, and then also to destroy it, are part of these elements that we consider to be unpleasant. Even the birthing process is very unpleasant. And both of these things tend to be associated with the feminine. There's strong feminine associations with death, as there are, obviously, with birth. And so I don't know. So I feel like when you look at these goddesses of filth and of pollution, that they almost cut this kind of bridge. They allow us. We have kind of separated ourselves, just as we've separated into categories of good versus evil, for instance. Or we've separated into categories of, clean and unclean, pure and impure. While we understand it in terms of community, we understand that there needs to be a place for the pollution to go. There needs to be a way to transform what is polluted into something that is nourishing, right? It's like that's part of the cycle. There's a transformation that's going on here. Now, as I mentioned from the article I was reading by Cecilia Klein, she talks about the way in which gold and precious metals and things, gold in particular, was considered to be the excrement of the sun, as the sun god went through at night. And yeah, there was even some kind of a comment about the yellow light as being the diarrhea of the sun on the horizon. I'm like, that's going to make me not look at sunrise the same way again. But it was just... Yeah, the idea that gold And in fact, they would eat gold or gold dust as a kind of remedy for certain illnesses. So when the conquerors came, their idea of what they wanted gold for was something very, very different. And so that's why there's these battles, because they wanted to take their gold. With the Aztecs, the gold wasn't about necessarily about material value in terms of, this is a pretty shiny thing that we've assigned a value to. It's more that, no, this is something that that provides a cure. And of course, if we think of alchemy, we think of the whole idea of taking. Carl Jung talks about this. The sacred marriage and so forth, the Mysterium Conjunctionis, or Conjunctionis, if some people want to. I always do classical Latin, but it's but there's this idea of this kind of sacred marriage there between these things, and of course, out of this space where you have this filth is something that is transformed into gold, and that if that is true of the earth in some degree, this is also true of the soul. I mean, it was the idea that they were trying to do this in a material sense. Whether you can really do that or not, I don't know that anybody ever succeeded at that. But certainly as a concept for the psyche or the soul, it makes sense. And certainly when I coach people in my other side of what I do, that's one of the things that we work through. We use healing techniques and I use energy therapies that are about transmuting the stuff in us that we don't like. Alex is saying, I'm reminded of the film The Holy Mountain. Yeah, I have it actually on DVD, like right behind me. There's a whole scene that is turning human waste into gold. Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you. Thank you for the reminder about that, because it's been forever since I've seen The Holy Mountain, and that is true, right? The idea is that, it's in the things that we think are foul where the real treasure is. If you think about the underworld, if you think about Pluto, the idea that name Pluto is from Pluton, right? I mean, or at least that's one of the derivations of the name, because that's where the wealth is located. It's located under the earth. In a system that says there's good and evil, there's angels and demons, there's heaven and hell is a bad place, and it's hot, and it stinks, and the demons there are that way, we automatically decide that this is all stuff that we need to push over here and be like, ew, no, we don't want any of that as that's not part of, like we want to disavow that that's part of us at all. We don't, that's not part of what it means. Well, of course it's part of who we are, it's just part of what it means to exist in a body. And I guess this is why some people are like, ooh, it's gross to exist in a body, right? Well, how else are you going to exist? You're going to float around? You exist in a body. And this is the realities. These represent the realities of everything that we want to put on some kind of a transcendent level, but they're here. This is the Chtonic reality. You're here, and this is what it is. But it's showing that, and I feel like this is a really good demonstration of what we call the dark feminine, in the sense of this is not something, what we think of as related to the earth, what's under the earth, what might be filthy and so forth. This may be the way through. That's the way to healing is through, or the way to rebirth is through the things that we think of are filth, that we think of are bad. So we're not talking about exorcism per se. There are certain things that we want to get rid of, but I think I said it was Nietzsche who had said, when you exorcise your demons, make sure you're not, getting rid of the best part of yourself. There's something there, these things are there for a reason. And when you dichotomize it and say, I'm only going to associate with everything that I think of as good and pure, and I'm going to not associate with everything else that I think of as impure and bad, they're both part of your experience. Okay? They both have to be integrated. It's interesting. I'm thinking of the temperance card, right? And right now we're in Sagittarius season, which is temperance. And that's exactly what temperance is about. It's how do you mix those things together that you think are paradoxes, that you think don't belong together, but they're all part of the system. And they all have a place in the cycle. They all have a place in what we're doing and in what we're trying to manifest. And I think the more we try to get rid of just say, well, I'm going to disavow, or usually we can never get rid of a lot of our psychological things that we think of as toxic. We just repress them, and then they become worse because now we just project them onto other people, and we don't actually see them in ourselves. But there's this, I feel like looking at this pollution in this kind of a way, it's reminding us of something about the feminine, about the aspects of the feminine that people don't like. Not the virginal sanitized. It's interesting, virginity, right? The non-sexual one. The things that are sanitized. We're not talking about things that have been sanitized, because when they've been sanitized, there's you can sanitize something to a point that now you've created an imbalance, and you've actually created a worse situation, not a better one. And again, I know there's people as people I'm friends with and so forth, who are anti-vax, and I'm like, vaccines are what have brought diseases down. That's why public health demands that people get vaccinated, because these vaccines, it's by taking in a bit of the disease that you have the cure, or at least that you have the means of fighting the disease. In other words, your body recognizes it and says, oh yeah, that's not good. And then your body creates the antibodies that are needed to fight that. But if you just say, oh no, I'm never going to get vaccinated because I'm not going to put a disease in my body, to me, it's kind of like the same people who say, well, I'm going to avoid all these things because I don't want to fall into sin. Well, everybody's going to fall. You can't not do that. I mean, and why do you need to look at it in that way? People who need to have all pure foods and all pure this and all pure that. I mean, okay, some people maybe have really terrible allergies or something, but strictly speaking, we get very, very excessively paranoid about what's in our environment, to a point that we're no longer living in it. I mean, soon you're going to have to live in a plastic bubble to just avoid everything. And then, that actually reminds me of that Creep Show, the one of the first ones that they did series with, that last one about the guy with the sanitized apartment and the cockroaches that cut in. That almost reminds me of that as well. And to me, that's almost a statement about when you are over-sanitizing your environment, when you're a germaphobe in excess, okay? We're not just talking about normal hygiene to keep us from basically getting sick. We're talking about, excesses. And I think it's interesting, too, when I go into hospitals, hospital is a place that you think that needs to be extra hygienic, because, you're doing surgeries, you've got a lot of sick people. Yes, Alex says, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I know, that was and I read the comic book too, and it was just okay, no, I just can't look at this. But and it's I've worked in hospitals in several different capacities, and when I've worked there was always the thing of, oh, you got to wash your hands, you got to sanitize every time you go out of room, and yet hospitals somehow are the filthiest places I've been in. It's so weird. For all of the extra measures that are taken, everybody wearing masks and gloves and walking around, and part of it may just be because the cleaning staff are not quite so clean. They have the same. Somebody I know had been in I think it was in Hackensack, where the woman was mopping the bathroom floor and then was going to take the same mop and clean her husband's tray table. And she's like, "Get out of here with that thing! What the hell do you think you're doing?" And the woman just looked at her like, "What?" So disease finds its way in. Every time I've had to go in the hospital for any kind of procedure, I always come home sick, which is why I'd rather not be there, rather not stay there. I don't think a lot of them are the way that a lot of them are there's no ventilation in them. There's no, it's just not there's a lot of a chance for stagnation there, which is another thing that can cause disease. But okay, just kind of derailing into that there for a minute, but and I do want to finish up because we're getting to the hour, but it's interesting how we have these ideas of pollution. Our ideas of pollution are not only associated with excrement, but also with sex, and then of course with menstruation and things like that, right? So women kind of get treated as they're like a pollution, but this is trying to say no, that's. Yeah, there's a pollution. Men have a pollution too, okay? It's not just women. because all of us, get rid of our byproducts, right? But when we start viewing all of that stuff as evil, then that's really more evidence of the disconnect that we have from the world that we live in. The disconnect from nature and how it actually works. We live in this dualistic idea that says, everything around me must be sanitized. And not recognizing that some of those things that are diseased are actually the things that might actually sustain our life. Maybe the means of sustaining life in a different way. You know what I mean? Either through, the manure that you put on the field to make it rich and fertile, or the idea that certain bacteria that you have in your body are actually there to be helpful to you. You don't want to kill off all of those things. And similarly, the things that we think of as being in shadow in our soul are also not necessarily the things we want to get rid of. We are always constantly shaming ourselves about who we are and what we are. And my point is that you have to stop shaming yourself for what is and start looking at these kinds of things as being a beneficial part of who you are. This is just, when you start saying anything that that isn't aesthetically pleasing in some way is somehow evil. Okay, you can carry this. Like I said, this whole purity concept is something you can carry to other extremes where it doesn't belong. When people talk about racial purity or ethnic purity, ethnic cleansing, you've heard that phrase. I mean, you can take some of these things to extremes in terms of your associations if you are too repelled by all of the things around you that are just maybe unpleasant, normal aspects of life. Even sickness sometimes. I remember when I did my Reiki training that Frank Arjava Petter had once had some kind of a Reiki prayer where he said, basically about things and saying and allowing me to be sick sometimes because sometimes that is what I need. Sometimes our body needs to be sick. Sometimes it needs a break. It needs a rest. It needs a rebalance. And sometimes that sickness also gives us time to rest and time to heal as well. It allows us to work through. And psychologically, that's what some people say the function of depression is. That depression is actually something, and again, I'm not talking about severe clinical depression, but if you're, we all go through moments when we have the blues, right? When we're tired or we're sad about something. And this is a time when we may withdraw and we may reflect. There's always a need for like almost a regeneration that goes on. Just as Chthonia represents this process of regeneration. She's the goddess that takes all the filth and then it kind of gets regenerated into something that is actually the good stuff of the earth. So, we're not talking about this idea of what's filthy as being evil. And I've never been a fan of good-evil dichotomies. I mean, to me, true evil has more to do with the human mind and how we may, disconnect from nature or dehumanize people or dehumanize. That to me is more what evil is about, not about this kind of stuff. So anyway, we're a little past. These are just some of my musings that I was thinking about as I was thinking more about the topic of today. Hope you guys all found this interesting. And yes, and I will be, like I said, Chthonia Books is having its sale right now. If you want to buy more than one title, if you want to buy different titles and you want to buy them all at once, DM me and we'll figure that out. Otherwise, I do have the links listed in, I have it on my bio. So Alex says, thanks, enjoyed the podcast and this chat. You're welcome. And and I'm sure, I'm sure I'll see you tomorrow morning on the live stream too, Alex. So thank you guys so much for joining me and anybody who's joining me after and watches this in video. And I'll see you guys next week. So have a great one and happy Thanksgiving if you're in the USA.